Hey everybody, welcome in. It's another episode of a Nichols Worth. Thank you for joining me here on the show. All right, right there at the bottom of the screen, that's where you can catch me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Keaton D. Nichols. Also, make sure you follow the show at a Nichols Worth, Spotify, Anchor, and Facebook as well. A great way to follow along with what's going on. Happy Thursday out there to everyone. Happy a few things going on today. This nightly, I love this nightly edition of a Nichols Worth. Get to do this every single day. Happy Bobby Bonilla Day. If anyone knows who Bobby Bonilla is, any baseball fans out there, Bobby Bonilla, former member of my beloved Pittsburgh Pirates, of course. Then later with the Mets, he gets paid today on July the 1st every single year. That's why they call this Bobby Bonilla Day. July the 1st every single year. He gets paid approximately $1.1 million from the Mets as a part of the contract that he set up. Like, that's how it is. Now, Bobby Bonilla retired more than 20 years ago. However, he still receives these payments. I believe it's more than 20 years. It's been somewhere around 20 years. Anyway, every single year he's received on July 1st $1.1 million for the Mets and will be receiving that money for quite some time. So congratulations to him. If you go on Twitter or just run a search through the Googles, you see that there are other athletes that also have this sort of arrangement, including Kevin Garnett. I saw Kevin Garnett, former Celtic, got traded to, I think, like Brooklyn or something like that. And one of those crazy deals that sent like half the Celtics to Brooklyn. Anyway, in that particular situation, he's getting paid until 2028. There's a number of other athletes that are on the bill for a lot of these teams. So, you know, that is what it is. But anyway, happy Bobby Bonilla Day. Also, the first day of the second half of the year, which is crazy that 6 months are gone from the year just like that. But anyway, hopefully everyone has some big plans for the second half of the year. This has been a weird one in terms of just kind of recovery and everything else like that. So I won't say that I hope you had a great first half of the year. I do hope you had a great first half of the year, but more importantly, I hope that we finish it out strong. It's weird to be talking about the second half of the year already. But anyway, let's get to some headlines. Today's headlines, by the way, sponsored by Parkour Athletic Apparel. Go to parkourtherapy.com, where you can also check out the brand new Parkour Plus workouts. You get a free trial. You get a free week of Parkour Plus workouts if you go to parkourtherapy.com right now, and you can do them right from your phone. No excuses, folks. Make sure you check them out. So shout out to Parkour for sponsoring our headlines. The headlines today include news on the Trump Organization and one of its members getting squeezed by federal authorities. Later, we'll talk with Chris Rogers. Looking forward to that, about critical race theory and a project of his, which I think is very important at attacking one of the subjects and topics that I'm very passionate about, and that's education. As well. So he's got a really cool project. He heads a really cool project that we'll talk about with Chris Rogers a little bit later. But first, the big news coming at the top of the day. Of course, this headline coming from ESPN. NCAA clears student athletes to pursue name, image, and likeness deals. This was a big one coming down, and an important sort of cog in the wheel of, are college athletes going to be paid in some way, shape, or form for their participation in the big college athletics racket, as I like to call it? It is a bit of a racket when you really think about it, because there's a lot of people making money not named the athletes. Plain and simple, right? That has always really been the core of the issues, especially since the NCAA has become such a huge entity. Not just your ability to watch these athletes play on TV or on the radio or setting up events where you actually get to see them play, but also the merchandise, the items, the events, the overall advertising dollars that come into these different schools based upon the performance of the athletes on the field or on the court. This has become a huge, huge problem. Well, along in the story, as the story goes, couple of things have happened in the last couple of years that have shifted this conversation from the players will not be played and cannot be paid under any circumstances. You had coaches like Dabo Swinney, who's the coach of the football coach of the Clemson Tigers. He says, look, if college athletes ever get paid, I'm done. I'm quitting. I'm out. You had people that were this strong about it. Now, Dabo Swinney is a head coach in the NCAA. He's had a lot of success in the NCAA and belongs to an organization, a school there at Clemson University, that relies upon strong recruiting talent every single year. Clemson and other schools like Clemson, Alabama, I'm talking about just for football in this particular case, but other sports as well, right? Certain schools have this tactical advantage of being a prestigious school for insert sport here, right? Using football as an example, again, if a player has a high pedigree and they end up going to a school like Clemson University and all the scouts are looking at them and they have, all this recruitment power, what that recruit does while they're at Clemson University, they're unable to capitalize off of, monetarily, at least. Those, 1 to 4 years that they might, or 2 to 4 years that they might be at Clemson, can't make money off of that. They sign away their rights to be able to make money as soon as they accept that scholarship offer to play at that school. So this was obviously a problem. This was obviously something that was imbalanced considering the now billions, with a B, billions of dollars that the NCAA makes from these student athletes. And I say from these student athletes because, again, let's think about this from a very logical perspective. You got people that pay money to see these athletes, to wear their jerseys. There used to be video games that were made with these players' likenesses and images in the video games that people would purchase with real dollars, real money. Those people were purchasing those items or those services because of the play of the athletes between the lines, inside the lines, if you will, on the court or on the field. That's why. Like, you don't buy a Clemson Tigers t-shirt, if you will, because you like what Dabo Swinney, the head coach, is doing with the program. You don't buy a Clemson hoodie or sweatshirt because you want to just support the orange, if you will. That concept kind of, if you believe that, then you believe that this is truly an amateur sport. And the NCAA for a long time tried to fight to keep the status of students as amateurs. This would allow them to be able to profit as much as they can off of what happens to the game without the individual athletes profiting themselves. There was only one funnel of money, if you will, one place for this money to funnel, I should say, that the NCAA was making, and that was right into the pockets of the schools themselves. If you ever wonder how a school was able to pay a head coach, big name schools were able to pay head coaches millions of dollars to coach basketball or coach football or baseball at their particular institution, well, that's how. The NCAA pushed back for a long time saying, well, the payment, if you will, that these athletes are receiving is the scholarship opportunity to attend our school. Something that normal people, if you're not an athlete and you're not a scholarship athlete, have to pay to do in some way, shape, or form. This is the idea behind this. This is the thought behind this, right? Well, pressure over the last couple of years has changed this, and today's news is pretty big. This is a way to sort of describe what has happened, because a lot of people are asking too, does this mean now that they will be paid for, their work, so to speak? Are they going to be paid to play? That's not what this is saying. The NCAA's athletes will be able to accept money from businesses in exchange for allowing the business to feature them in advertisements or products. Athletes also will be allowed to use their own status as a college athlete to promote their own public appearances or companies for the first time. So what effectively does that mean? That means that athletes can now set up business. They can now do business. They can now sell their name, image, and likeness as a business. A couple of athletes have already taken advantage of this. I think you had some Twins that went to, I think they play volleyball. I just don't want to make anything up here. For like University of Nebraska or something. I lost my notes there, but you have people that are already able to take advantage of this. Another college football player that him and his dog have now signed a deal with Petco to be able to sell products through their website. Him and his dog are able to do that, right? Before, athletes essentially signed their rights away to be able to do that kind of thing. It's a big change. It's a big change, mainly because it controls the power of who gets paid in the NCAA, an institution that many have likened to the idea of slavery. Now, I don't know if I'm willing to say that, if I'm willing to go that far and say, well, this is just like slavery. I don't think it's quite that far, but the concept is kind of the same. Like the concept is kind of the same. Players without a guarantee of what the next level is, the next step is, are giving their blood, sweat, and tears in many instances, all for the glorification and all for the profit, if you will, of the school that they go to. They receive no percentage of this profit. Accepting a scholarship offer to attend school at an institution is not payment. It is not direct or indirect, in my opinion, payment for playing sports at these schools. Make way too much money off of that. And in addition to that, they're not guaranteed any success after that. They could attend school for 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, break a leg, break a knee. Maybe they're just not good enough to get to that next level, even though they were a scholarship athlete in college. And what happens to that athlete afterwards, oftentimes, is very tragic. And the reason why it's tragic is because these schools aren't teaching these kids anything. They aren't running them through the ringer, if you will. They're not held to the same academic standard that other people are. They can skip classes. They can, miss out on assignments, and it's not really a big deal. They're athletes. Who cares, right? So if the school is saying, we're offering you an education in exchange for your play, but we're not going to really offer you a full education either, then something's got to give here. I mean, there's a lot of cats that were out there just doing it because they love the game. And you watch college basketball, it's a different type of intensity than the NBA. The NBA is great, but it's a different type of intensity in college. Same with Saturday college game day when it comes to, college football. Some of those places are ruckus. And I don't doubt that there are some athletes that legitimately enjoy being able to play the game that they love, even without the promise of payment or anything after that either. But the game got too big. The game got way too big. And that became a problem. Let me know what you think in the comments, because now this is setting up an interesting situation. This is setting up interesting situations. Here's how we got here. 2019, California state legislator out there passed a law that made it illegal for its schools to ban athletes from making money. It made it illegal for their schools to ban athletes from making money. If athletes found a way outside of their school to make money, off of their likeness and their image, then they're allowed to do that in California. Once California passed that law in 2019, other states realized that they would inherently be behind the 8 ball if they didn't start to change some of their rules too. 24 states after that have passed similar laws to make sure that their schools weren't at a disadvantage when it came to recruiting. I mean, think about it. If California, or if let's say whatever state that you're in, you're the governor of that state, you want success to pour into your state. That includes college students or college prospects, if you will, that become valuable in this whole thing. You want your school to do well. One of the ways that you could do well is having a top flight athlete play there. And the attention that sort of brings is always good for your school, especially these athletic directors for these schools who are tasked with increasing the revenue that comes from these programs. But anyway, if you're one of those states that doesn't offer your athletes an opportunity to make money from their image and from their likeness, then you're just out. You're just out. You're going to lose on recruits, which is in and of itself. When you take a step back, you realize how serious this game is. When you think about recruiting and when you consider how important recruiting is to these schools, these people aren't paid. So the schools want these athletes to come to their school not because they believe that they have a fine academic institution. They realize the individual value of these people of these athletes rather, that are coming to their schools. They realize that's why they want them to come. And so when California changes their rules in state that say, look, you can make some money. If you can find a way to make some money as an athlete, then you're free to do it. Other states had to respond by passing similar laws that would allow similar things in their states. So that was one pressure valve, if you will, that was released. The other one happened last year. I talked about this story in early iterations of a Nichols Worth. Jalen Green, who was, of course, the number 2 or number 1 prospect, depending on how you were looking at it on ESPN, along with Isaiah Todd and several others, top basketball recruits in 2020, decided instead of committing to a school, any one of the top schools that could have supported their talent at the time, like Auburn, they were getting some offers from some pretty significant schools. Okay, Jalen Green and Isaiah Todd and others that year, top recruits, decided, you know what, I'm just going to sign with the G League. How about that? Because if I sign with the G League, I have a guaranteed salary. That's an important step here. Jalen Green, Isaiah Todd, these cats are 17, 18 years old, right? They're just graduating from high school. And if you're a top talented baller, and you're graduating from high school, the first idea is, that they put in your head is like, you got to choose a school. You got to choose somewhere to go for at least a year or two before you get to the NBA. There is no natural progression per se, other than the one that we've kind of worked into our society that goes straight from high school to college, then the NBA. There's nothing that says you have to do that, right? And so the G League, which is basically a developmental league for the NBA, says, we'll take you. We got this new Ignite situation happening over here, G League Ignite. How about a $500,000 contract for Jalen Green? You'd be crazy not to turn that down. When, as Jalen Green, you can't really profit off of your likeness. You can't really make that happen. Okay, so I have a chance to make $500,000. $500,000 from this. Or I can try my hand in college and hope that things just kind of work out. Just hoping. I mean, it kind of makes sense when you think about it that, he decides to make this offer, right? This deal. And it says, I'm just going to go here. Amazing, amazing stuff. Absolutely amazing stuff. Let me know what you think in the comments section, because I think this is going to set up some interesting things. Very interesting things. Players are going to have to really think hard about this. They're going to have to say to themselves, am I really going, to the G League, if you will? Am I really going to sign up and go to the G League? Potentially collect. By the way, the average salary is about $35,000. $35,000. Now, that's obviously a lot different than $500,000. But still, if you can go to a G League, have a G League opportunity, you're a top baller, and you have a G League opportunity for $35,000, I think you take that. Let me know what you think. All right. Let's see. Sorry about that, folks. I have no idea why that's doing that. Meanwhile, while we try and get this camera and mic together, like I said, let me know what you think. Yeah. Not really sure why it's doing that. All right, let's see here. Yeah, not really sure what's going on with the camera here, but hey, we are back. We're going to do this anyway. So hopefully everyone can hear me. If anyone cannot hear me or anything else like that, just let me know in the comments and we'll go from there. All right, so where we're talking about the NCAA. I was just getting ready to get to some comments, and then coming up after a quick break, we'll get to my first guest, Chris Rogers, on the line right now. Jovan Alfred starts out by saying Bobby Bonilla is the true GOAT. That is a fact of life. Bobby Bonilla, former Bucco. Former Pirate, still getting that 1.1 M from the Mets every single year. Good for him. One of the all-time finessers, by the way, in NBA, MLB, NFL, professional sports history. Good for him. A lot of other athletes collecting that check. But Bobby Bonilla sets the tone. He also says, Jovan, he's one of our friends over at the TSL podcast. You guys got to check that out. He says, in addition to the NBA G League Pathway program, there's also something through Overtime. They are creating a league called Overtime Elite or something along those lines. He also says Darius Basley, is another player that I just thought about. He was supposed to play in the G League, but I think he got an internship at New Balance and ended up being drafted in the first round by OKC. So I did not actually know about Basley. That's an interesting story there. But it opens up this question about, like, what are athletes worth? Like, what are these college athletes worth? It's kind of a weird question to ask, but it's only weird because we have the conversation about college athletics through this lens of amateurism. And so, you know, if making money, if these athletes making money feels and seems kind of weird to you, it's because you're used to understanding them as free players. They're supposed to play for free. There's nothing about what they do, though, and the money and the attention that they generate that should be for free, not in a capitalist society, a capitalist country like what we have. Let's go to Rashawn. Appreciate you listening in, Rashawn. She's on the line. She says, the part where they're not truly educating their athletes, unfortunately, they leave that to the student. We all know a 19-year-old athlete isn't going to choose calculus over ball. That does make sense, you know, for sure. And I think it's even less of a chance in my view and my vision. It's less of an opportunity to kind of have a choice in this whole thing. Like, I don't think that, especially if you're a top tier athlete, and I don't even want to just say top tier athletes, but I don't think that if you're an athlete that is a scholarship athlete, let's say, or that you have a regular role in the teams now or in the team's future, it's hard for me to see how those students would have any time to do something significant in school. I've seen it with my own two eyes. There have been numerous reports. We talked about University of North Carolina a number of years ago, and those paper classes that they set up for some of their athletes there. Fake classes, basically, to be able to take to say that they did the credits, that they got the credits taken care of. What that situation said to me is that you cannot compete and be a top athlete at one of these schools if you have any interest in your academics at all. I'm not saying that people can't do both, but if you're there on a football scholarship, as an example, if I'm at North Carolina on a football scholarship, what's more important? Is it the calculus, as you say, or is it the football that I'm there on scholarship for? You gotta believe that it's football. And so if you have this situation where you have to kind of choose between the two, it's very, 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 very difficult to be successful at both. And so there you go. If you think about what today's ruling sort of opens up the door to, is thinking about your presence at a college or university as having something to do with your success or your career as a potentially successful athlete down the line. It's going to have less and less and less to do with the actual school. I mean, you talk about choosing between, basketball and calculus. Imagine when you are making buku money off the basketball thing. No car dealership is going to want a college athlete to like rep their car dealership because they got an A in social studies. That's just the way that it is. Maybe it should be like that, but it's not like that now. They want them to promote their car dealership because they scored 5 touchdowns last week against State. and everyone around there is going nuts. That's what it is. So it's amazing. You know, if you want an education, don't be an athlete. If you want to be an athlete, don't expect an education, I guess. That's the tough part about all this. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and then we will read that comment for you here on the show. Let me get to a quick promo break. On the other side, we get a chance to speak with a good friend of mine, Chris Rogers, and his project, of course, or his organization, rather, Black Lives Matter at School. Talk about that and how critical race theory, a buzzword that we keep hearing a lot about, is going to fit within that conversation and where it fits within that conversation as well. Be right back after this.
Wake up. Look in the mirror. Tell me what you see. It's you. Only you can decide to forget about yesterday's failures and focus on today and tomorrow's success. We all share the same 24 hours. Your dreams won't chase you. Chase your dreams. Don't allow the world to run you. Run the world. Don't talk about the ladder. Climb it. Don't dip your toe into the pool. Dive in. That's the only way you'll learn how to swim. It all starts with you. And in the end, only you can change you.
Yes, welcome back. It's a Nichols Worth. Thank you for joining me here on the low definition, the standard definition of a Nichols Worth. We're going to have a conversation with the tech department after this show, the tech department being me. Leave your comments in the comments section. Right, real quick before we get into our next conversation. T keeps it fit commenting in, and he says, first step, hire a financial advisor. 2, hire an accountant. Step 3, hire a second accountant to make sure the first one isn't stealing. Boom, set for life. Ball or no ball after the first contract at $500,000. That sounds like a great strategy. You have been playing 2K, my friend. I can tell. Road to the show, whatever 2K's like player build mode is. Seems like there's a lot of lessons to be made. I think somewhere in that story, correct me if I'm wrong, because I never played the 2K story, but I think somewhere in that story, on 2K, like when you take the individual player, you know, he's kind of leaning away from the traditional methods of kind of rising through the ranks to get to the NBA. So, you know, maybe the game developer's playing on a little bit of a trend, if you will, a little bit of a trend. Let me bring in my next guest as we shift gears here. You can always leave your comments in the comment section. I'm going to get back to them as quickly as I can. Oh, there he is. Chris Rogers in the house.
How you doing?
Just making sure we can hear Chris. All right. Yes, we can hear Chris. Man, I wanted to bring you on this week. I felt you would be definitely a great addition to the first week of the show, and I want you to tell everyone why here in just a second. Chris Rogers is our first guest here on this season of A Nichols Worth. He's the curriculum committee co-chair for Black Lives Matter at School. In addition to that, he's also a very smart dude. I always learn something new whenever I talk to Chris. I appreciate you taking the time out this evening, Chris. How you feeling, man?
I'm feeling all right, man. I'm really excited. Congrats on the new show. I've been following people a while, so excited to see this new format. And I know you'll get the tech right.
Hey, man, the tech will come. If you get the tech right in the first couple of shows, you're doing some like magic, like pure magic. Right. Anyway, I appreciate you taking the time, of course. And what I wanted to talk about initially was this concept of critical race theory, CRT. Sometimes it's abbreviated. We'll get to that in just a second. You actually sent me a piece a little bit earlier that describes a little bit about what you do, a lot about actually what you do as curriculum committee co-chair for Black Lives Matter at School. Black Lives Matter at School alone, let's just start there. What is this project? How did it start? And kind of what does it aim to do?
Yeah, I think so. Black Lives Matter at school as a sort of national movement really gets its grounding here in the city of Philadelphia in late 2016. A number of teacher activists were, reflecting on the ongoing mobilization, in the streets of Philadelphia and pretty much everywhere, right? The Black Lives Matter movement, and we're not officially tied to the Black Lives Matter of like the official network, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we were like reflecting on just seeing the organizing that was happening in the streets and recognizing that as educators we have a responsibility to teach what is happening in our in the world of our students, in the world of our families, and bring some of those same questions around society and how the world is structured and what we can do to change the world into our curriculum, into our classrooms, and
Yeah.
build relationships with people who are on the ground creating change in their communities. So yeah, late 2016, a number of educators came together, and it's kind of like three things that come together. And I'll say is like curriculum, right? So creating these opportunities to talk about the work of racial justice and how that is everywhere, not just
Mm-hmm.
not just in our schools, but also in our healthcare system and our economic system. Like it's not, but teaching it like the role of racial justice so much. Secondly, is relationship building. So like building relationships with local community organizers. Thinking of like the many organizations that we have here in the city of Philadelphia,
Mm-hmm.
Black Lives Matter Philly, the Philly Coalition for Real Justice. What is our relationship to the people who are on the ground, putting platforms for how they think the world should be,
Yeah.
changed to serve our people? And then other than that, education policy changes, right? So we focus on like, removing police from schools. We focus on rebuilding the Black educator pipeline. We focus on ethnic studies and Black history in schools. And then also the role of disparate discipline and expulsions and push out
Mm.
of Black students all across the country. So those were like the ideas that really grounded us. And we've grown to be in something like 70 something cities
Wow.
as of last year and been a real force. So much so that we've got named in some of these GOP bills. But we'll talk about that later.
That's a lot of fun. You always know that you've made it whenever you pop up in the GOP
Uh,
bill. Definitely love that. But what you're describing seems like such a massive project, and when I think about sometimes what spawned rather this conversation and me wanting to talk about this. I was having a conversation with a friend, and I was at a function, and I was one of maybe one or two people of color at this function, and race came up. Right, I didn't bring up race.
mhm.
I was there to have a good time. Okay. You understand where I'm coming from here with this. Sometimes you just go somewhere and you just want to have a good time. Right. And someone brought this to my attention. They're like, hey, man, it said something along the lines of like, I bet you, I feel so bad because life must be hard for you. Right. Like with everything going on. And I was just like, oh, man, like the only reason why I, sort of, I don't want to say shied away from that conversation. The only reason why I was dreading that conversation, it wasn't because I don't like engaging in conversations like this, but it's oftentimes the individuals that will ask you something like that. They ask you the superficial question, or they say the superficial thing like, oh, it must be hard for you. But the conversation to really address that is so deep. It's
Yes.
so critical. It really is. And the fatigue that I experienced in that moment was not me wanting not to talk to that person. It was me saying, man, I'm going to have to go all the way back. I'm not going to have to explain why George Floyd was messed up. I'm going to have to explain systemically why America is messed up. And that's why George Floyd happens. It's this overwhelming sort of feeling that especially when talking to adults, I'm not talking about kids here,
Yeah.
but when talking to adults, there seems to be a huge part of a missing curriculum maybe that just isn't there when you're having these conversations about race. So by the time we're talking about George Floyd, or by the time we're talking about an issue that comes up more recently, it seems that we've skipped over several really important steps in that person's understanding of race and where we are in this whole conversation. That's why I thought it was kind of important to bring up in this case, because I think from here into the future, your project is helping to usher in a different type of not just a different lesson plan here. Like this wasn't just a week of Black Lives Matter education. This is something a little bit deeper, right? Like it's teaching people almost to be different in the way that they interact with others.
For sure, and I've definitely been there. So I echo the frustration that you might have felt in that moment. But I think, and I sent that article from the Atlantic, the writer Connor Friesdorf or something like that, who's like a really well-respected right-wing writer. And I didn't know that at the time when we had done the interview, but the gist of trying to talk about the purpose of why we talk about disparities that, across race, but also across gender, across sexuality, right? These things intersect, right? These, different markers of identity intersect is not, and I think sometimes what gets lost is like, we get caught up in like the interpersonal emotions of it. And we don't have the grounding to really educate about like the economic and true like life chances foundations that race, sexism, antagonism towards gay and trans communities, like these are true life outcomes, right? In terms of like whether people are living or dying in our society, and that affects education. Yes, it affects economics. We could talk about like living wages. You could talk about access to healthcare. So there, and then we could talk about environmental racism as well. So what I was trying to get across to that journalist, and as well talk about the foundation of why we do this work, is because we see these disparities everywhere. So we have to educate the next generation to understand that this is not an individual problem. And it's not do I feel good or bad about my identity, right? But this is a question about societal structures and institutional policies which like incentivize or detract from certain communities, right? In real sort of like life outcomes. So that's where the work is looking to go. And I think it was important that, in particular for the curriculum project, is to recognize that we are sitting on, a mountain. We stand on the shoulders of giants, right? There's many people who have done this work for centuries in terms of documenting these disparities. W.E.B. Du Bois. You can look at Black Reconstruction and the work that they have done, right? There's so much that is there for this generation to like sit with and think about. All right, but what's next? How do we continue to add on to this legacy? How do we add on to this tradition? So I think that is the work of Black Lives Matter at School, right? And we both serve as educators that are instilling this into the next generation. But we can't pass the buck ourselves as teachers, right? We have a responsibility that when we see injustice, when we see unfairness in our classrooms and in our communities, we have to do something. So the best teaching comes out of modeling, right? So we have to model the type of activism, the type of engagement with community that we want to see in the world, and we want to pass on to the next generation.
Yeah, speaking with Christopher Rogers, of course, Black Lives Matter at School, something you definitely want to read up on and do some research into, because they're doing, again, as I like to call it, heroes work. BlackLivesMatterAtSchool.com is the website. I will make sure and put that up on the screen before we get out of here as well. But, I talked a little bit about, this concept of critical race theory. It's something that's being pushed back upon on conservatives now. It's interesting that you mentioned that the article that you sent out to me a little bit earlier was written by a conservative writer himself. I didn't actually realize that when reading that. But it was interesting because at some point in the article, I can remember the word indoctrination coming up in the article, and I had to stop on that for a second because I was like, it's interesting that would sort of arise in this conversation. All there's many different forms of teaching that may be considered indoctrination. I would think, at least, but I think indoctrination in this case is an interesting concept when teaching about, race in this context. And you almost have to think of it from a critical perspective because we've gone too far in the process, I guess, the way that I look at it, to really romanticize about the relationship races had, with, in the United States with black people and people of color, rather, in the United States. It's too late for that if you want to take an honest approach. But I read that word indoctrination. What would you say to somebody that, from an outside perspective, looks at things like critical race theory and the project that you're doing, as well, and almost setting a different tone, a different curriculum and a different tone for education? What would you say to those that might consider this or think of this as some sort of indoctrination, or what would your response be to that?
So I guess if I'm feeling petty that day, I think the first thing I would do is say there is no neutral, right? There is no outside. We're always being indoctrinated with some form of ideas. There is no objective, right, truth, mm-hmm. right? And mm-hmm. we can get into a whole debate, right, around the philosophy of objectivity and it's sort of like its own genealogy emerging from, Enlightenment Europe, which is like erasing the tons of other ways of seeing the world that come out of the global South, right? So I think that's one of the, if I'm being petty, I think it's important to recognize that there is no neutral in education, so that when you think that you know a normal, or you think that this is the American story that must be, we can poke holes in all of that, right? And I think that's important to do. But I think the other side of it is that I think what I've been, particularly in this position as like curriculum committee co-chair, is like, I think it's important for all our students, for all our communities, to recognize the wide perspective of ideas in the world, the different ways of organizing the world, the different world systems that exist, right? And how those tensions show up in world history. If you look at the 20th century, you look at, the rise, the Soviet Union, the rise of communism, the socialist movements, right? Yeah. These are all different ways of structuring the world. And I think that it makes us better. It makes us smarter. It makes us able to make more important critiques, and also think about what's important to all of us when we go through that and don't try to ignore it. So I think it's when folks are afraid of indoctrination, I think sometimes they believe that if you expose someone to an idea or an alternative, right, that it's just immediately going to be taken up. Well, there's so much work, right? We can talk about all the failed experiments that have happened across history, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's important that we enter into those spaces and talk about them from like a real, what was the vision of this movement? What was the goal? What was the overarching mission? What was the important values that these sort of movements, political movements, economic movements, social movements were looking to, impact the world with? So I think that my challenge to indoctrination is this challenge that we need to expand our consciousness.
Yeah.
And that when we do, it makes us better people. So let's not try to erase, let's not try to censor, let's not, blacklist so much, but focus on really navigating these ideas in a smart way and looking at what impact and what real impact, material impact they have on the world.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I also think that, especially young people today, kids today are capable of handling that. There was another reference in that article to, not directly, but kind of asking the question, is it too young to be, or is there an age that's too young to be introducing these concepts to kids? Like we're talking about race, and my vision, absolutely not. I mean, there's a pushback for a reason, and I think folks would like things to be viewed the way that they currently are because it works for certain individuals, as you said. But the kids nowadays and young people nowadays, and I think even adults to that point too. Going back to that story about being in that environment where you're just like, look, man, I'm trying to have a good time, and somebody's coming up to you with conversations about race. I think adults are able to handle those conversations too, but it does require an expansion, like you said, of your consciousness. Why I say that the work that you do is heroes work, because the kids are probably the easy ones to work with. We can, once kids are able to understand this concept, it's probably some of the older kids, if you will, the adults that would struggle with a lot of this, but. Just to kind of try and put a bow on this conversation, we can go on for hours and hours. I always do appreciate my man Chris Rogers for taking the time out today. But I want to ask also, what do you think is kind of next for this project, Black Lives Matter at school? Because it started with just like it was like a week of education that started kind of coast to coast type of project, of course, but it's grown exponentially since then. But where do you see this kind of going into the future, and being how do you see this being a part of that kind of curriculum?
Yeah, I think so. Last year was our first time that we moved into. So we started with like a week of action, and then last year we added a year of purpose. And as one of our steering committee members, Okaikor, beautifully says, we're moving from a year of purpose into a lifetime of practice. I think one of the things that's immediately ahead of us, and I definitely wanted to bring this in, is that we're seeing these GOP-led bills pop up in pretty much every Republican-led legislature across the country, and they're kind of like they're all using the same template, but in Pennsylvania it's called House Bill 1532. And I find it key here that you say individuals, right? Because what the bill attempts to do, right, and it has nothing to do like with what truly critical race theory is and its foundation and the tenets of critical race theory as a tool of analysis, particularly that emerges out of legal studies, has really nothing to do with it, but it uses that as like a straw man, so to speak. But the idea that they focus on is like they're trying to criminalize teachers who are propose or advocate what they call racist or sexist concepts. So if you had a second, I could read a couple to you.
Please do. Yes, we got time.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna read a couple and tell me what you think.
All right.
So, any of the following concepts defined in this bill, which was led by Representative Russ Diamond, is a racist or sexist concept. Number one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. That is a racist or sexist concept. It feels okay, right? That was
okay. All right. I'm here so far.
Two, an individual, by virtue of race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. That is a racist or sexist concept. It gets better. 3.
Come on now.
Racist or sexist concept is an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment due to the individual's race or sex. 4 gets good. 4, an individual should receive favorable treatment due to the individual's race or sex.
Racist.
5,
racist.
An individual or institution cannot and should not treat individuals without regard to race or sex, right? So, we're good people here. We know that race exists. But 6, an individual's moral character is determined by the individual's race or sex, right? So you can't not call a white person racist simply because they're white, right? That's what that is basically teaching us. Number 7, the individual, by virtue of the individual's race or sex, bears responsibility for actions committed in the past by members of the individual's race.
Oh, wow. Oh, that talk about an insurance plan that covers all bases. Goodness gracious. So for those that maybe came in the middle of that list or might have missed that, these are basically rules and regulations that the legislator wants to put in place as another way of saying, please do not teach those kids what's really going on. That it kind of placing a barrier around knowledge and information and saying, look, you can eat from anywhere in the garden except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil type of thing. A little bit different scenario there, but the concept being the same. It's amazing what's going on here. You know what also amazes me about these bills is that suddenly GOPers, which typically aren't good on this kind of thing, suddenly kind of understand and know some things about race. They kind of suddenly understand the critical importance of race in these moments. It's hilarious.
The memo which launches this bill quotes directly from Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. That Martin Luther King had a dream that no one will be judged by the color of their skin.
Goodness gracious.
Their character. And 50 years later, look at us now. We're judging people by the color of their skin. That's what they got from that speech. They didn't listen to any of the other speeches that day.
No.
Or any of the rest of the paragraph.
No. For that whole era, for the last 20 years before or after that.
Right.
But that's what that's why sometimes, and in all fairness, that's why I'm really harsh and I'm critical on elected leadership, because there are times that we have conversations about, we had this conversation about like maybe these elected officials didn't take action because they didn't know. Maybe they were just genuinely ignorant. This is not their thing or whatever. Let's cut them some slack. But then there are moments like this where you're like, aha! Like I know you have a brain in there, and I know you know how to think about race in a way that is relevant. So stop with the nonsense. It's the only reason why I had that kind of pressure towards leadership, because they know. And I appreciate organizations, like Black Lives Matter at school, the work that you're doing as well. Like I said, is heroes work. You should be congratulated for not just the importance of your work, but also the uphill battle that you face and you and your colleagues face every single day when attempting to, when attempting to get this kind of thing in our schools, because of these kinds of individuals, the kinds that will make laws and regulations to make sure you can't talk about X, Y, and Z. But you fight anyway. You do it anyway. So shout outs to you, and shout out to the folks working at Black Lives Matter at school. If folks want to check out more information, I'm sure they can go to blacklivesmatteratschool.com. But are there other resources if people want to reach out and people want to participate in what's going on or help out or add? How can they do that?
Yeah, for sure. So, blacklivesmatteratschool.com is where you can find a lot of our resources. We're also gearing up. If you go to our Twitter, BLM at School, we're also gearing up for a retreat this summer. We're an all-volunteer organization and getting ready to think about how we want to mobilize in response to a lot of these, teacher criminalization bills that are taking place all across the country. So we're working towards that. But I did, Keaton, we talked about critical race theory a little bit. And one of the resources that I really recommend, in particular to education, is a leading figure in the evolution of critical race theory from legal studies is Charles Lawrence. And he wrote this amazing journal essay called Forbidding Conversations, and was placed in the Yale Law Review somewhere in the mid 2000s. And he asked this question, which I think gets to the core of what we are struggling against right now, right? And he says, he's looking at the implications of school choice in communities, right? And we're going to segregation, and that our schools are still segregated today, right? He says, does the pursuit, in the eyes of the law, right? Does the pursuit of public equity take priority over the liberty of private choices, when those private choices can, in some ways, further inequity, right? So are we searching do we have a public commitment to equity, or do we believe in individual choices? Man. That to me is the fundamental question that we are seeing explored, and they can call it critical race theory. They can say, what do we want to teach in the schools? But that question is what people are scared of, in particular because we use so many pronouncements and moral rhetoric to say equity matters. But we know that people are out here to secure their own private choices that furthers their own, significant interests. So that's what we're really up against. And if anything, I'm happy to engage with people to kind of discuss that question moving forward. You can find me at blacklivesmatterschool.com. I don't know. Let's teach a lesson. Let's build a lesson plan.
Let's do something. Listen, I was going to say I might be the one to have this conversation with you. I call them on this program, I call them freedom nerds. They're big-time freedom nerds. They're so obsessed with their own personal freedom that they infringe on everyone else's. It's amazing. I would actually like the name of that book, if you could get, I'm sorry, the name of the author and the essay that you got that out of for serious, because I talk about that all the time on this show, how ironic it is that people are so obsessed with freedom that they will infringe on somebody else's just to ensure that they have theirs. It's quite backwards. But anyway, this is what will be the first of what I hope will be many conversations, Chris. And again, I appreciate your time and you coming by on a Nichols Worth, lending your voice to this program. And we will talk to you again very soon, my friend.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and have a great evening.
Yeah, you too as well. That's Chris Rogers. Make sure you hit him up online. I'm all out of time for today's episode. Couldn't think of a better way to spend it than talking critical conversations. Chris Rogers, Curriculum Committee Co-Chair for Black Lives Matter at School, doing great work. Thank you to all the people that commented in and listened in on the show. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, for the last show of the week at 8 p.m., wrapping up all the news, politics, pop culture, sports news of the day. Follow me. What else do I have to say? Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Keaton D. Nichols. And make sure you follow the show at A. Nichols Worth. Shout out to Parkour Therapy for sponsoring this week. Parkourtherapy.com for more information. Parkour Plus workouts available now for free for a week. And make sure you use the promo code ANW2021 for more 10% off all the great products. I'm out of here. We'll be back tomorrow at 8 p.m. See you later.